Welcome to Studio Time, and the next episode, again, is a Mortal Engines character, and this character is Hester. Again, like I said in the previous episode, I cannot say too much about the movie and the plot and the characters, because I might give away something about the film, and the people don't want that. So, I'm going to keep it brief. She's the main character of the film, and I needed to write a theme for her. So again, at this point, I was hanging out here in this studio with Peter, Fran, and Christian, and at that point something really funny happened, and I played the London Suite, which we covered in the previous episode, and then Peter said, "You know what? It sounds so much better on big speakers than it does on an iPad, isn't it?" And obviously, that's the modern time that we're in. You know, we all laughed for a good amount when he said that, but that's the reality. So when you send things out as a demo, there's no such thing as a demo. Everything needs to sound like finished product. But nevertheless, expect people to listen to this on their phone, on their laptop, on their iPad, not proper in the studio with big speakers. So you want to make sure that your stuff always sounds really good on a laptop and an iPad when you send it out. So on the side, we were sitting here and we were discussing the theme for Hester, and they left, and I did a version of it, and I sent it out, and they thought I completely had it wrong. And so they sent me back, and basically they were saying, you really need to capture the heart of this character throughout the film. So start at the end and make your way back, or start at the beginning and make your way forward. But it needs to feel like it really travels somewhere, it really goes somewhere. But they wanted something very simple and recognizable too. So I was thinking, I was playing, I was thinking, I was playing. And also, if you write a theme, you need to be aware of what the complications are when you then throw it into action music. If you make it like a love theme, if you make it a scary theme. So all these things were important. So eventually I settled on something very simple, and they really liked it. So let me play you now what the melody is, and then we'll get to the other instruments. So the melody is... Super simple. I'm a super bad piano player, but this theme gave me a lot of room to go to different places. So let's just focus on just the opening line. So if I play this super suite with just the basic chords, it sounds really sad. Now, if I play it slightly different with different chords, now it sounds more like a love theme. So let's play that. So now it sounds more like the beginning of a love theme. So now if I play it really aggressive, I can take it to a different spot. If I play it really in the low end, it could be scary and it could be great for an action theme. So these are things that are always important when you work on a theme. So if I now go to different instruments and I copied a few instruments of my template right here so I can immediately go to it. So let's now go to the flute. So really nice and sweet, so that can take you somewhere. Now, if we, for instance, go to the cello, let's see how it sounds here. So that can be nice. Now let's go, for instance, to the horn. Let's say we're now talking about around really big action cue. So that could work in an action format. And now let's go, for instance, to the strings. So let's now play something scary. So that gives me room to go somewhere, which I also did in the theme for her. Now the cue that I have here open, it's called 2M10A, and let's just leave it at that. So I won't get into trouble. What's going to happen here? I also got rid of the marker tracks that I normally have that tells you exactly what's happening in the cue, which I highly advise to do. But there's still a marker track there. What did I do there? The marker track there, I'm writing down what the harmonic progression is or what the chords are. I do this a lot. The reason why is that it makes it very easy that if you go through a lot of different harmonic changes throughout your film and you're working in the cue and it's late at night and you're just looking at a bunch of notes and just like, what chord is this again? And then instead of like trying to figure out what the voicing is, I'm not talking about when you just see a string patch, but when you have like a bunch of runs and there's things happening in the brass and in the woodwinds and in the programming, all that stuff together will give you an indication of what the harmony is between all these different instruments. So to make it a little easier for yourself, I just type it out. The other thing that makes it handy is that if you pass this piece of music on to one of your assistants that needs to do something on this cue, like a conform or change some things around or working on notes, it makes it easier for that person also. Oh, okay, that's what is required here. This is like a C minor chord, or this is like an E major chord over in A flat, or something like that. So it's clear what you're trying to say, especially when you start using not simple harmonies that I just played, but when the harmonies get more complicated, it's easy just to show what you're trying to achieve. So in this cue, this is actually the first time that we hear her proper theme. And I'll play the cue to a certain point, and then later I'll play the whole thing because the cue is like way longer than just that. There's a lot of things happening in this cue. So once we get to the final recording of this thing, so what I have open right now is the latest MIDI version of that cue that got approved. So here we hear the full theme. And the other thing that is important to me as well is that, yes, you're looking at the picture and you see that there's a big wide shot or there's something else. So instead of playing a different piece of music, just keep playing the tune that you wrote, but then take the arrangement and make it bigger and then make it smaller again when the picture requires that. And that way, that's a very important tool to sneak in a full theme into a movie, even though you need to go to all these different places. You'll hear what I mean when I play the thing, and then we'll just go over it. So let me just play the MIDI version of this cue, the last one before it got approved. Okay, then we get into the section where the cue starts changing and it starts going into a different direction. So here you mean here's exactly what's going on. What I meant before is that you just basically heard the whole tune once, but it does change arrangement. It gets really big at a certain point and it gets smaller again, but the tune just keeps playing. So the opening is being done by the flute here, and then it goes to the strings, and then the flute joins back in with the theme at the very end of it. Let's just see what goes on. There's not all that much going on at this point in the cue. It's the flute that plays the theme, and here we have the strings that then eventually take it over when it gets bigger. So this is actually quite a very simple arrangement, but very effective when you see it in the film. So now I want to switch sessions. I want to go to the mix session, and then we come back and we talk about this section one more time, but then with the live recordings. So see you in a second. And we're back with the mix session. So we talked a little bit about the mix session in the previous episode about the London suite. I still want to point out a couple of things that I've said before, and then we move on to new things. So when you look at my mixing page on the right at this point, the only channels that you see here are the live recordings. So we're looking on the left, the live harp, we're looking at the live strings, the live woodwinds, the live brass, then the live soprano, and live choir. Who thought that Junkie XL would ever record a live soprano? But I did for this movie, and it sounds gorgeous. Nevertheless, so the thing that I did here, if we stay on the mixer page, is that you see I built VCAs that will actually control the instrument. So if I move a fader down, all the faders connected to it will move with it, which makes it a little easier to do automation. You could potentially also create a screen set where you're just watching the VCA faders, which makes it even easier. And why don't we do that? So this is like a cool feature in Cubase that I use a lot. So if I were to go to the page, all VCAs, oh, I already did this. Man, I'm smart, or I anticipated this, but I probably already did this. So now we're just looking on the page at just the VCA faders, which makes it very easy to do your mixes. You could potentially assign these to controllers. If you have the new Native Instruments keyboard, which I actually have, which has the feature of really controlling things in the mixer, like really sexy. So if you have a page like this with just a few VCA faders, this is a perfect opportunity to mix it with something like this or with your keyboard if that's what you want to do. I'm actually more of a mouse guy, so I like doing it with the mouse. So I am going to play the same opening that we just played, but now everything is live. And the thing that I want you to look at, if we stay on the mixer page, so I'm not going to scroll through the arrangement here. We stay on the mixer page. What I want you to look at is what I did with the VCAs. Because after you've done a live recording, the live recorded players putting so much emotion in it and the way that they play, but sometimes they put a little bit too much dynamic in it and sometimes not enough. So with the VCA faders then connected to the live recordings, I can help the natural performance even better by putting things up, pulling things down. So a lot of that is done with the VCAs. So let us play that same section that we just did, but now everything is live. Okay, so let's stop here. So at this point, it's primarily the strings and the live woodwinds that the automation is done on, and you could see it goes up and down in almost like a range of 15 dB. So that's actually quite a lot in the mixing world at this point. But Natural Instruments need extra help. So let's now see if I did anything else to these instruments. So if we were to go to the strings, let's select them here. Let's see what we did with that. So there's clearly the automation on there that we already discussed. It has some reverbs that are being sent, and again we see here the BX console that we already talked about in the previous episode. And if we open a few of them in a row, you actually see these different numberings. Again, what we also talked about, randomizing the plugin to get like a more natural classic console feeling to it. That's what we did with the strings. But then there's another thing that's really interesting, and that's why I have the sample strings. So in the live strings, the main melody line that the strings then take over in the violins was not loud enough compared with the low end in the strings. So voila, here we have the sample string that really comes up really high in volume to help us with that. So let's play it without that section, and then let's play it with. Okay, so let's play that section again with the sample string. Without. You see that the sample string now helped us getting that melody line out a little bit more, and then after that, it's been taken out. So this is why it's very important to, in my world, to program your strings, brass, and woodwinds as good as you can in the most natural sense. So if you need a little bit of that, and this is just the first violin that I capped of the samples, just to push in a little bit, just to get that melody line out. Let's see if I did something similar with the woodwinds. I can already tell you no, because yeah, the samples are switched off. Sample woodwinds, they still don't sound great, and then combined with live guys, it sounds terrible. So you gotta choose. Like if you have a bad woodwind performance, sometimes you might want to go for the samples. Or if you're as stupid as I am, that you sometimes forget to record something, which I actually did. One of the suites, there was a whole section with woodwinds that I really would like to have recorded, and there was actually time to record it. I just simply forgot. But we had a mountain of paperwork sitting next to us, and at a certain point there was paperwork all over the room, so I have been forgiven by other people that I forgot that. But nevertheless, it was stupid. So never use them together, either or. Brass is a different ballgame either. So I primarily use the horns. If I feel like I'm missing a little bit of the power or a little bit of the melody, I just boost it like a little bit in the automation to come up. Other than that, I'm just going to stick to the live recordings here because they sound so great. So if I were to play that brass section, and also here you see the automation. So when you have brass like that, that sounds so great, you don't need a whole lot more. I did double it up with the samples two-bap, and let's see, let's play it with the samples. Here we go. So it's very subtle what I added. So don't get fooled though if you see in the mixing window the fader higher than actually the live recordings. You just got to look at the level it's actually generating. It's not all that much. And then, you know, with the live brass, you have like 4 channels of that actually being generated. The other thing I would like to point out of the live recordings is that what usually happens is that we record with 50 or 60 or 70 microphones, depending how big the session is. And then after that, the first thing that I do is sit down, and in this case, I did that as well, where you sit down and you really concentrate on all the separate microphones. You decide what you want to choose, what you don't want to choose. And then you create a really nice image in how that needs to sound. So in this case, I did it together with John, the mixer over there in Wellington, to give me like some compact stems. On other movies, I've worked with Ella Myerson, who would then take the 58 microphones and turn it into something that's more easy for me to work with. So in this case, it's a closed microphone. It's a quad hall microphone, short, and then a quad hall recording, like super wide, like the microphones in the back of the room. So I take that and then I start processing it. So what do we do on the brass? Like something similar. So I bring up the BX plugins again. We've already seen this. It starts to become familiar. So I did some processing on it. There's a little bit of compression on it. We went into that in the previous episode. And also you see the numbering of the channels that gives it the natural feeling of a console. So that is the brass. Then the woodwinds we just went over, which has a bunch of stuff recorded, usually solo instruments. So that's how we started. You heard them already isolated pretty well in the section that we just played. Also here I used the two BX channels. Let's bring them up. They have nothing going on really. But still, and that's the cool thing about this plugin, is that you can run signal through it and it still touches the quality of the sound because you're running signal through it. And that's really cool with these plugins. There's one by UAD that I use a lot as well, which is not in this session. It's the Manly emulations that they did. So there's the variable mu, there's the massive passive, and these are great too, just to run signal through. Don't even touch the knobs, just the fact that you're running the signal through it. It's kind of like what happens with a real compressor and with a real EQ hardware. If you run stuff through it, it gives it a color, even without touching the knobs. So that's a really interesting feature of this plugin. So you don't necessarily have to touch the EQ or the compressor. Just running the signal through it and randomize it, it will give you a slightly different sound. So I really like that. So this part of mixing, like I mentioned in the previous episode, is quite different than mixing in the writing stage, because that's when you get really experimental with sound design and sometimes 5 or 10 different plugins on top of one instrument just to make it weird or whatever. This is a stage where you do proper mixing between brackets, where you really correct like certain frequencies that aren't right, controlling the dynamic range a little bit and doing a lot of fader movements to make it all in balance with one another. That's really what this stage of mixing is before I then deliver everything to the stage. So now that we've played this and now that we talked a little bit about the automation here, I want to play you way more of this cue, what happens. And then we see some of these Hester elements come back in what we talked about earlier in this episode: action, heroic. So we hear those things coming back. So let's just play these things from the top, and then I'm going to play it till the end. And what you're listening to is actually the final mix, the final recording of this cue. So another thing that you hear is an introduction of a second theme and then a third theme. The second theme is the ba-da-da-da. That is then also being sung by the soprano, and then a brass version of that adds at the end. Separate tutorial about that. And a second theme that comes in is the bam, 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 bam. Also a separate tutorial about that. So this is what the live recording became of that cue, with live brass, live woodwinds, live strings, live harp, live soprano vocal, and live choir. So a lot to record, but we all did it with the great help of Conrad Pope in Wellington in New Zealand, and we talked a little bit about the mix moves and the plugins again that I showed you. So this was Hester's theme for the first time. It is completion in 2M10A, and I hope you like this episode, and I'll see you soon.